I wanted to open up a space for us to talk about investment and capital and entrepreneurship in a way that's focused on something that looks like a better world. And we all want to have optimism around this better world. And there are building blocks, literal building blocks that we need to put in place to make the world a better place. And it starts with who is funding what. It gets back down to that boardroom table where there's a bunch of investors looking at a lot of ideas, and why do they fund some and not others? And in order to lead us in this conversation, we're going to talk to somebody who is one of the co-founders of Zebras Co-op, which is basically Zebras Unite is a member-owned co-op that looks at sort of this tripod of capital, culture, and community. And those things create a more just and inclusive economy. I think for us to really be empowered to have this conversation, the ground rules are there's no wrong question to ask any of us when it comes to what the hell are we talking about? What does it mean to invest? Who can invest? Who can join co-ops like this? How do they measure success? Who are they investing in? How much money do I need to be an investor? Do I have to have a big idea, or can I just come in as somebody who wants to be a part of this conversation? So I think we're going to get a lot of those answers with Sassy. I'm going to call Kate Sassy, Sassoon Sassy, because that's how she's introduces herself, to help us and sort of drop into this conversation and really look at it from all angles. So if you have thoughts about this question, can we build businesses to create a better world? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you part of a business that you think is creating a better world? Sassy, you are in one, definitely, that is really about a cooperation between people, which I think is a baseline. Like, let's all get along. Let's all work together. Are you finding that to be true? Are you meeting people that are really kind of dropping in from all parts of the world saying, yes, I want to be a part of this change. I want to disrupt the status quo. I want to not have such a narrow focus on what is 10x growth versus what's a growth that can look at all kinds of bottom lines, not just the profit. The planet, the people, those are other things we need to look at. Are you finding success? Can you give us a window into what you're seeing that's giving you a big sense of positivity? Because obviously you're not doing this unless you feel like, there's something here. We're doing this. This is great. We have success. Can you help us kind of get a window into your optimism and what's informing it? And welcome to Swell, by the way. Really great to have you here.
Hello, Deborah. Thank you so much for inviting me. A couple of things that your lovely intro and kind of setting of the conversational stage bring up for me. First off, a correction that actually leads me into a really great answer for one of your questions. I'm not technically one of the founders of Zebras Unite. I am one of the founding members. So we're a multi-stakeholder cooperative, an LCA, as well as a 501c3, a nonprofit. So we're a hybrid organization. We present many sides to the world to do the many-sided work that is, innovating on systems and doing, paradigm shift work inside, primarily because of our origin story. The four founders were four women who were in the startup world, right? Really trying to create organizations that were going to have a material positive impact on the world. And, they articulated their experience and the need for an alternative in the article, Zebras Fix What Unicorns Break, and, Sex and Startups, etc. All of the wonderful articles that kind of really coined the idea of what is a zebra, and directly in opposition to the unicorns that the venture capital world is hunting. And that has kind of set the tone for entrepreneurialism in this current moment. Entrepreneurialism is as old as humanity, but currently we have it in a very strange, to me, way. So I'm a founding member of Zebras Unite in the person of my business, so Sassy Facilitation, which, as you pointed out, I help co-ops cooperate. I help people who are attempting to co-own or co-operate assets, businesses, homes, any kind of organization that helps support their needs through some way of doing that together better. And coming from the cooperative world, I see a lot of really tried and true, amazing organizations and organizational ways of being where, again, you're right, it does come back to that boardroom. So what if the people who were impacted by the thing, or the people who were building the thing, or the people who were being served by the thing all had seats at that boardroom table? right? And that's really the premise of both Zebras Unite and why they found their way to the cooperative movement and became a multi-stakeholder cooperative. So I grew up in that movement, I work in that movement, and I see quite a few things to bring us optimism. Democracy is not perfect, to paraphrase Churchill. Democracy is terrible except for every other way of organizing people. So it's a challenge, but it's the right challenge. And it is centering, the challenge of, instead of how do we massively extract and level up capital when we are already quite capitalized, as anyone who is professionally a venture capitalist could honestly say of themselves, what if we were actually making sure that that capital was in service to those who are undercapitalized and on the front lines of the needs of the world, which is ultimately the business opportunities of the world. So that's really the premise of both Zebras Unite and a lot of the work that I'm doing, and really what I measure in terms of success and what brings me a great deal of optimism. Because, for example, 1 in 6 people in the world is a member of at least one cooperative. And that's not by accident, right? There's a lot of, when you put the business model and the people who are ultimately the people who are being served by, either through the livelihood of ownership of that business or working in that business, or the products and services that they sell, or the tax base that it exists within, and the society it supports, etc. When you put the people and the people's needs, including very much the need to exist on a planet that is not actively incinerating itself or depleting the biodiversity and the ecosystems on which we rely for our existence, because we are all, after all, a part of the earth. So if you put the needs of the people and the needs that we have for having a planet back at the center of business models, and the funding streams, decisions, structures, and ways of having remuneration and return, put those back at the center of the business model, and from that premise ask, what would be an efficient way to do this? What would be the best market fit for this product or service? As long as you're reintegrating the people and everything that we rely on back into that calculation, that's actually how you go about starting to try and make the change. And this is not a new idea. Cooperativism is as old as humanity. The kind of green business movement, etc. There have been people trying to do this way for as long as there have been people. We're just kind of in a moment where, through a lot of amazing and deeply nerdy historical factors, we've arrived at this moment where we have this huge wealth gap and ways of investing it that are not incentivized to serve people and planet, but mostly just profit. So Zebras Unite and my founding membership of Sassy Facilitation in that is all about trying to be a living lab for a new way of being.
Kate, thank you so much for this extraordinary reply and for clarifying things for me and for everyone. I want to take a little bit of a jump back. You talked about 1 in 6 people are part of some kind of cooperative. And can you help us understand, and thank you for really chunking this back, what a cooperative is defined as? Is it about democratization of decision-making throughout the entire organization? Is it about the sharing of profits? What are different kind of cooperatives that can help illuminate for us this idea? Because I think what I really want to get through to in this conversation is this question of businesses as a good thing, and meaning that they actually not just can be about profit, but they can create our world in a different way. And I think it starts with us understanding what a cooperative actually is and its definition for you, and giving examples for us so that we can, because that's a staggering ratio. When you say 1 in 6, I didn't know that. So if you can help us out, that will be awesome. Thank you. So great to hear your voice, and welcome to Swell.
Hi, Deborah. Yes, let's take it back to basics. I'm always here for that. And as someone who, as I mentioned, kind of grew up in this world, I am constantly reminded that that is not everyone's truth, despite cooperatives literally being as old as humanity and the basic structures being something that I grew up understanding. We're kind of alienated from that knowledge by most of our school systems. And we can have another conversation about whether or not that's intentional. But it's very important to kind of just, get back to brass brass tacks. So what is a cooperative? So I'm actually going to quote heavily from the International Cooperative Alliance. You can find them online at ica.coop. They're a group of, I think, over 200 representative countries that have just come together over the last many, many decades, if not over a century, to really come and have some sort of international set of guidelines. But before we had the UN SDGs, at least we had this one group of folks coming together to really try and say, okay, well, if we're trying to make enterprise be a force for good, or just acknowledge that there is no difference between enterprise and life, and how about we make it all good? We need some standards for that. We need something we can measure. We need something we can agree on. And so they came together to create the definition of a cooperative, the kind of what are the values, and then what are the principles that we use to say this is a co-op or this is not. And the degree to which every organization that espouses them upholds those, that's going to vary as much as humanity varies. And of course, it's going to be really different in every country and context. But to bring it way on back, a co-op is an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise, right? So the key points there is people coming together because they have goals, they have needs, they have dreams, they want to meet them through something that they co-own and they co-govern. How they co-own and co-govern that, there's a huge variety of ways, from a very flat, very horizontal kind of collective identity where governance and operations are shared in a very horizontal fashion. That usually doesn't scale very well unless you're talking about a federation of cooperatives, in which case it can scale pretty well. Or up to the very gigantic representative democracy where you own a share, you have a one member, one vote election where you elect your board of representatives who then are ultimately beholden to and operate the co-op on behalf of its members, right? So I like to say that if you can think of any kind of business or industry or sector or service, there is a co-op doing that. And the only real difference between a cooperative version of delivering on that thing and a non-cooperative version is just who owns it and how is it governed, right? And so just to briefly skim through the values and the principles that the ICA uplifts, stewards, holds, and evolves for the movement, because every 35 years or so they come back together to reconsent on iterating these. The values are self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equity, and equality, and solidarity. So those are actual values that all cooperatives need to espouse and uphold and articulate into their own context in order to count. And the principles, and you'll see actually more folks organizing around these days, and I invite you to kind of just use them as search terms in your exploration of what has already been done in this world, and what giants can we stand on the shoulders of as we roll forward. So first we have voluntary and open membership. Anybody can join, no barriers, no breaks. Democratic member control. People own what they govern and govern what they own. The general rule is one member, one vote, but there's a bunch of nuance and complexity in there, of course. Economic member participation. So this is saying you got to have skin in the game so that the co-op is ultimately, at least in part, funded by and economically beholden to its members. And so that those members really care, right? You're in it. You are part of this. You buy in and you own and you really bring that. Autonomy and independence. This is saying they are not beholden to, for example, governmental institutions. This was particularly more important throughout the 20th century as various political and social movements intersected with cooperativism. Fascinating history, becoming less important, but not necessarily true forever. Education, training, and information. This basically says co-ops work best when our members are actually empowered and informed, and we do better to grow our cooperative ecosystems by empowering and informing our neighbors. Cooperation among cooperatives, P6. You'll see some funding work being done in the world right now under that P6 moniker. So if you see P6, essentially is cooperation among cooperatives, solidarity and action. We can take over economies if we have hand to hand to hand to hand. And there's some really beautiful case studies in Latin America and other places where we've literally taken over economies, even for a short space of time, according to that principle. And last but very much not least, concern for community. This is where all of the other stuff about how do we be good workers, good businesses, and make a good life together. That's principle 7. So that's it.